Finley to throw. Over the middle, intercepted. Wolford again. Wolford the other way at the 30, the 40. Wolford to midfield. Miles Wolford with the pick. The Heels on the doorstep of an enormous victory. Williams is the running back next to Howe. Play action. Howe will now lob it down the near side. Newsom with a man all over him. Pins the ball against the back of the defender and brings it in. Heels can get a first down at the 3. Now, pump fake to the right. Now he's going to run to the left. Howe at the 5. Takes the shot. Pinballing off the chains for the touchdown. Showing the toughness for 6.
Tar Heels down 4, 35-31. May has the shotgun snap. Pressure coming. Rolls to the right.
Goes to the end zone. Touchdown! Touchdown, Antoine Green! 16 seconds to go. No flag.
Snapping it off the 8-yard line. May pulls it, tries to roll it apart.
Oh, now he's going to throw it and score! Throws it to Payson in the end zone for the touchdown! They are throwing a play for the left-handed. Was walking out on the run and threw it left-handed. Nard fields it at the 26. Heading to the far side. Gio at the 35. Gio, he's at the 50. No, he's not. Yes, he is. Gio, he's going to take it for a touchdown. Are you kidding me?
What's going on, guys? Welcome into another edition of the Heel Tough Blog Podcast. It's your host, Anthony Pagnotti, here with you guys. As always, Josh Marlowe alongside of us, which means there is some big news going on in the Tar Heels universe, and as there should be, it is the opening to the transfer portal starting today, and there have been plenty of rumors around the Tar Heels that have been rolling in. We'll get to some of those here coming up, some of the not only rumors, but proven intel that has been released on either on Twitter or on different sites across the landscape here that have shown that there are guys that are on campus in Chapel Hill. There are also plenty of things to talk about when it comes to Carolina. In terms of the targets that they have offered. There are a couple other guys that they have offered that haven't been on campus yet. And one of the guys that we will talk about tonight, probably the biggest thing we're going to talk about tonight, is the target at quarterback, Billy Edwards Jr. out of Wisconsin. That is the guy that it looks like Carolina is sort of narrowing down their list to. He's where they're going to start at least. Here over the next couple of days. They're having him for a visit here tonight and then into tomorrow. So we'll talk a little bit about him as well as the other guys that were on campus today. And then I will go through some of the other guys that Carolina is talking to. But let's start with really the biggest news of the day that we know so far in terms of guys that are actually going to be a part of next year's roster. And that is 3 re-signings for the Tar Heels. It started this morning with Damon June, the running back, the true freshman running back in the fold for 2026. That was the expected plan for Carolina, and they actually do get it done. So the official Twitter account announcing that earlier today. I think there might have also been a release from the program that they sent out to other media members detailing what exactly, I'm not sure if there were terms of the deal that were in there. It doesn't seem like there were, but they did end up releasing some stuff to the rest of the media, telling them that they were bringing him back. And then this afternoon, Jaden Patterson, the cornerback, around 2:00 this afternoon, ends up re-signing with the program. And shortly after him, defensive lineman Leroy Jackson is also going to be back in the fold for Carolina this upcoming season. So you hear that. Let's start with those 3 guys. You hear that. I think the biggest one out of the group is probably Damon June. That was the one that I think Carolina absolutely needed to keep around. They're potentially looking to add someone at that running back position in the transfer portal here, as witnessed by one of the guys that's on campus currently right now. but this was a big one to get Damon June back into the fold, someone that they absolutely had to keep.
Well, right now, you're looking for cornerstones, building blocks from last year's team to count on going into next year. You get your leading rusher back in Damon June, someone that experienced an up and down freshman year because of his utilization, but probably maximized his time on the field as much as anybody on the roster. You get that guy back another year in the weight room, he could really be poised to be a breakout player in the ACC and maybe nationally next year in college football. Jaden Patterson was a guy that it felt like the back half of the year, a guy that we just felt like the more he played, the better he got. Would make a mistake or two because he was young and inexperienced. But I loved the physicality. I loved the effort. And I think he could be a nice piece for that secondary moving forward. And Leroy Jackson was a guy that I also felt like at times you could see the potential of what he could be. And another year in the weight room program that Carolina's put a lot of stock in. This guy could be a valuable rotation piece up front for Carolina defensively next year. So Damon June is definitely the headliner. You get your leading rusher back. I think we could all think about what the production could look like in Bobby Petrino's offense, but it's more than just him. You get a nice piece back in your secondary, a guy that you and I are really high on, and then Leroy Jackson, a guy that could be a really good, solid piece up front. So I think a real solid start for Carolina in this portal cycle, retaining some pieces for next year. You're counting on in a bigger way than you did in 2025.
Yeah, with June, I think the biggest thing, when it comes to him is that you've got to be able to help him out a little bit with the offensive line that you're bringing in. I mean, you got to think he ran for 464 yards with a downhill mindset, a guy that at times, they said is maybe not patient enough, needs to be a little bit more patient. That's something that they're definitely going to work on. But a guy that wasn't patient enough runs with that downhill intensity, and you were running behind an offensive line that literally could not block. So you need to find some run blockers in the transfer portal this year. I think that's one of the main things that you need to look for. Find those guys that, can pass protect, but the strength of what they do starts in the run game, because I think that's what Carolina ultimately wants to be. That's what Bill Belichick wants this offense to be, is an offense that can run the football at a high rate and really build stuff off of their running game. So if that's the case, and, if you're investing in Damon June, it would seem like that certainly is the case. Well, then you need to be getting the right type of offensive linemen in there that are going to be able to run block better than they did a year ago, that are going to allow him to get a few more yards before contact, because we saw in some of the games where Carolina actually did have success run blocking, Richmond, the game against Syracuse, those were two of his best games of the entire season. Really, the two best games where he put together most of his production was in was in those matchups. So I think that's certainly something that Carolina's got to look at moving forward. That's probably where they are going to invest some heavy capital in the transfer portal, is on that offensive line. And that's part of the reason why, when we talk about the quarterback position, they might not be spending nearly as much money as we think they're going to spend. When you look at Jaden Patterson, I think that one was really big for a lot of reasons. I don't think it's the most impactful, but maybe the most important, because if not, you're talking about losing every single member of the secondary from a year ago that was a significant starter. I mean, you would have Caleb Koss that would come back in the nickel, but this is a guy that you're looking at and thinking is the future on the outside for Carolina after what he did this past year. I mean, you look at the statistics for him. I mean, he played 473 snaps, so he became a really big part of ultimately what Carolina was doing out there on the field. But I mean, for him, 34 total tackles, 2 tackles for loss, an interception, 5 pass breakups. In coverage, he was targeted 38 times, allowed just 25 of those to be caught for 259 yards and a touchdown, and allowed just a 74% 4.3 passer rating against when targeted. Really was Carolina's most consistent corner for most of the year, because after Thaddeus Dixon got banged up, when he came back, he certainly didn't look great. And we know that Marcus Allen was incredibly hit or miss. The other thing that you like about this is that it's another young guy that's back in the fold. So hopefully someone that's going to continue to get better as his time goes along. And then you get to Leroy Jackson. This is a guy that really, became a part of that rotation early in the season, started a lot of games for Carolina along that defensive line at defensive tackle, really started, I think, all but one game, if I'm remembering correctly, for Carolina. And, that's something that's incredibly valuable to get that guy back in the rotation for you, especially as a redshirt freshman. You would imagine that he's only going to get better for Carolina as time goes along. I think, part of that running back or the defensive tackle rotation for Carolina, I think, he put up some of the best numbers amongst that group. 37 total tackles for him this past season. He was fantastic. Did have a few quarterback pressures as well, 3 quarterback pressures. So wasn't a guy that necessarily got after the quarterback, but was very impactful in the run game for Carolina while playing 368 snaps across all 12 games. So certainly a guy that I think is very important for Carolina to keep. They made sure that they did that. And now, there are some rumors rolling in this evening, coming in from inside Carolina, that DeAndre Robinson is heading towards re-signing with Carolina on the interior of that defensive line. Isaiah Johnson, somebody told me earlier today that he already has re-signed with Carolina. So there's 3 of the 4 right there, if that's true, that Carolina is looking at or is in good shape towards being back next year for them on the interior of that defensive line. Then all you got to do is secure a guy in CJ Mims, who, the transfer from East Carolina, had some good moments for Carolina. If you can keep that rotation together, you're feeling pretty good, because then at the edge rusher position, there still are questions. Milcard Abujade seems to be the biggest question mark when it comes to the guys that could potentially be kept. As of right now, they're saying that things are trending in the right direction, but it doesn't feel nearly as close to the finish line as some of the other guys like Jordan Shipp, like DeAndre Robinson, who seem to be closing in on those decisions here in the coming days. One other thing that's interesting in terms of the portal, I know that there were some rumors. There have been some rumors today that Tyler Thompson is yet to officially enter the transfer portal. Everybody else, it seems like, has already entered. I think there might be one other player that they said has not entered, according to someone that I was talking to earlier today. They said 23 to 25 have officially entered their name into the portal. Now, that's, of course, grown to 26. If you guys didn't see the article that went up just before we got on air, Austin Alexander, the edge rusher, a true freshman edge rusher for Carolina, entering the transfer portal as well, which means that Carolina will have just 4 scholarship edge rushers back from this past year if they can re-sign Milcard Abujade. So that's an area that they're definitely going to have to hit in the portal. You hear that Tyler Thompson isn't in the transfer portal. Does that give you some hope that potentially Carolina could bring him back? And should that be someone that Carolina is looking to get back into the fold?
Yeah, absolutely. That was the guy that I thought really took a step forward down the back end of the season a year ago. And if he put on some weight, could really become a factor, I think, in the run game, helping do a better job setting the edge, and just being an all-around factor for Carolina up front. I thought, there were times where his undersize played a role in his ability to maybe get to the quarterback. But I also thought there were also times where that was a big reason why, he got manhandled the way that he did in certain games down the stretch. But that should definitely be a guy that Carolina's looking to retain at pretty much all costs. I think he could be that important of a piece for Steve Belichick in this defense next year. And so, the thing about the portal is you hear a bunch of different stuff when the season ends. And Carolina's season's been over for over a month, but they do have to officially put their name into the portal process before they can talk about going somewhere else. And so maybe this is someone that Belichick, Lombardi, and this staff has basically been recruiting all along to kind of make sure he doesn't get away from their program. And hopefully when it's all said and done, this is a guy that's back in Chapel Hill for next year, because I think he could be a real breakout candidate for 2026 if he's lining up for the Tar Heels.
Yeah, played in just 353 snaps this season as a rotational piece for Carolina at the defensive end spot. Finished with 25 total tackles, 7.5 tackles for loss, 7 sacks, and 20 total quarterback pressures. A guy that in really his production came during one stretch of the season, but I thought that was a big stretch, and he showed that he is a guy that can be pretty consistent during that stretch. I think, especially with how young he is, being that he is a guy that has only been in the system for 2 years, would continue to grow in the offseason in terms of the muscle that he would put on and the weight that he would put on, the good weight that he would put on, that would allow him to become the type of player that Carolina wants him to become more consistently along that defensive line. I think that's what Carolina is hoping for. When you look in the portal, I don't know how many other guys you're going to find that are really going to be as good as him, that are going to cost the same amount of money that you would probably be able to get him in the fold for. Now, I don't know how much money he's asking for. Hopefully it's not that significant of an amount, especially because, he did have that burst in the middle of the season, but the consistency wasn't quite there for him. But still, who knows what the price is for him. We'll have to wait and see if that ends up coming out. But I think Carolina should be doing everything possible to try to get him in the fold. He knows Steve Belichick's system. It's going to be a lot easier to have him show signs of improvement moving forward than going out and getting somebody else in the transfer portal, having them have to come in, learn the new system, and then grow from there. So I think this should be one of the priorities for Carolina now that they've got those 3 guys that we talked about just a minute ago locked up. Of course, guys like Milcard Abujide, Jordan Shipp should be the main focus of this staff. But one of the other things that they should be doing is talking to Tyler Thompson and seeing whether or not they can get him back in the fold for Carolina. I think everybody else, you're kind of just, you've come to the conclusion that Carolina probably won't be looking to bring most of those guys back. But I think especially with the losses that Carolina has suffered afterwards with some of the younger edge rushers, that were guys who Carolina was going to be looking to potentially step in with Tyler Thompson, in the portal. I think this is certainly, something that Carolina probably has, come around on and maybe feels like they need to do now if they are going to add somebody at that edge rusher position. So we'll monitor that news, see if there's anything else that comes out on that front here as we go throughout the remainder of the night and into the next couple of days. Let's talk about the guys that were on campus, though, today. And the most polarizing of the group is the guy that we have to start with, and that's quarterback Billy Edwards Jr. out of Wisconsin. He transfers after just 1 year with the Badgers, only played in 2 games for them before suffering a season-ending grade 3 PCL strain. He suffered it in the first game of the season, came back in the 4th game of the season and played against his old school Maryland before he would miss the remainder of the year with that PCL issue. So coming off a serious knee injury, that's something that seems to be very common in Carolina's quarterback room, are guys coming off of severe leg injuries, because you're talking about Travis Burgess, the incoming freshman for Carolina, that is coming off an ACL tear. And then, of course, Gio Lopez, the returning starter from a year ago, suffered a broken leg in that game, in the final game of the season against NC State. So a lot of guys that are going to be rehabbing for Carolina. The good news is I would believe that Billy Edwards Jr., because he got a little bit of a head start on it, will probably be the healthiest of those guys early on. Him and Travis Burgess, who both got injured early in their season. So hopefully those will be guys that would be able to play for Carolina in the spring, but certainly something that you worry about when you hear this name come up. I think that's, the main worry with him. And then some of the on-field stuff also probably worrying some people in terms of how many turnovers he had in his time at Maryland when he was the full-time starter for the Terrapins.
Yeah, this is not a name that I think many Carolina fans are going to be excited about hearing them being, I guess, their first quarterback target in the portal. You look at injury concerns, you look at turnover concerns. It's a pretty underwhelming name, but that should probably lead you to believe kind of what I've been saying for the last month since the season ended. It feels like, for whatever reason, whether it's financial or not, this staff is committed to Gio Lopez being their quarterback for 2026. Maybe Billy Edwards is being brought in, or would be being brought in, to maybe compete for the job. It would feel like to me that Gio would enter as the proverbial starter, and this would just be insurance with a quarterback that has experience behind him. And I don't know how you should feel about that. Like, because the coordinator hire is not official, it does make me hesitant to know or how to feel about what Gio Lopez could be next year. If Bob Petrino gets hired and that hire gets pushed through, I will go out on a limb and say Gio Lopez has a much better season next year than he had a year ago. And I think would look like the player that you thought you were getting when you went and got him last year from South Alabama, and you gave him a 2-year, $4 million contract. But that's not official. So I can't say that. And with that, you would think that Carolina, knowing that there's pressure to win now, would be looking to get a bigger name in the portal than the Wisconsin quarterback that's got all the issues that he has with his with who he is as a player. Now, granted, maybe there isn't that guy in the portal that they have identified that they have a legitimate shot to go get. I know you and I are really big Sam Levitt guys. Maybe that's just too big of a pipe dream. I don't know. You've got, the kid from North Texas who seemed destined to go to Oklahoma State. You've got, Lagway from Florida. You've got some other names. It just feels like you thought, considering Carolina was big game hunting a year ago, they would have been in the same position this year after how disastrous the quarterback spot was last year. And it does not appear on right now that appears to be the case. And so we'll see how this goes. But I do think it just kind of leads me to believe that Belichick is operating as if Gio Lopez will be his unquestioned starter despite a underwhelming first season in Chapel Hill.
Yeah, I don't know if that's necessarily the case. I think that Billy Edwards Jr. would be a guy that would be coming in to compete with him for the starting job, because Billy Edwards Jr. did have, some success at Maryland. It was a 4-8 team. It wasn't great. He was, as I mentioned, a guy that does throw a lot of turnover-worthy balls. But at the same time, there is some talent in there. I mean, I watched his highlight tape before we got on here. There's some things that you can like about him. To me, I think the biggest thing was maybe the shock initially that Carolina wasn't going after a bigger name. I do think that there are some names that are probably going to be in a similar range that I would be willing to take more of a risk on. Guys that, are coming from the FCS level. Maybe, somebody like a Caden Hauser at East Carolina coming from the group of 5 level. Maybe those are guys that would be in that range. I don't know. Hauser might be a guy that is receiving some big time offers that we just haven't seen yet. But yeah, I think when it comes to Levitt, when it comes to, Brendan Sorsby, a couple of the other big names, Rocco Becht, I know that was a name that was on the list that Inside Carolina put out. When it comes to those big names, Carolina's not getting in the mix for those guys. Carolina doesn't value the quarterback position the way that some of us do. And, that's okay. I think if they're going to put their resources towards some other places like the offensive line, if they feel like that's more of a bigger need, especially, the linebacker spot, the edge rusher spot, the safety spots, if they feel like those are needs that absolutely have to be filled because you simply just don't have the guys there right now, then I understand. I think you've gotten to a point where, based off of some of the reporting that's going on from inside Carolina and from Tar Heel 24/7, you're starting to get to the point where you got to realize Carolina doesn't have a lot of roster spots available. I don't even think the money is necessarily going to be the issue. I think it's going to be the roster spots. But this is a position that Carolina seems to want to play, wants to bring in somebody that is going to at least challenge Gio Lopez, but maybe isn't going to completely overtake him. So I think that's what Billy Edwards Jr. is. As I mentioned, I watched his tape before we got on here. I thought that he was a guy that threw a better deep ball than we saw from Gio Lopez. I think that's certainly an area that he would be, he would be able to bring much more than what we saw from Gio Lopez last year. I also think he's a guy that plays with a lot more intensity, a lot more confidence than Gio Lopez does. That can be a good thing. That can also be a little bit of a bad thing when it comes to forcing some things. But I do think there is more confidence to him. Really, when I watched him, I saw, a guy that's very similar to someone that Carolina was also picked to land by one of these random websites that picks out these, the landing destinations for these starting quarterbacks that are in the transfer portal. He's similar to Anthony Calandria, where I think if he went down to a lower level, if he went to the group of five, he would probably put up some really good numbers because he's a gunslinger. He's going to have moments where he looks really good, where he's throwing it all over the yard and putting up big numbers. He'll have other moments where he's turning the football over at a high rate and you're left pulling your hair out. I think that that's something that Carolina probably wants. I think there might be some familiarity with Billy Edwards Jr. from Bobby Petrino. And that's the thing. If Bobby Petrino signs off on it, then I think Tar Heel fans should sign off on it as well. I'm someone that's come around on him a little bit since I saw the news last night. So we'll see. We'll see ultimately what ends up happening. I didn't love that was their first target, but certainly is someone that might be a little bit better than initially thought of when he entered the transfer portal and when he popped up on the Tar Heels radar. As of recording, he seems to be the only target right now at quarterback. There doesn't seem to be anybody else. We'll, of course, keep you up to date if there is another name that pops up. But, there were some other names, some rather underwhelming names that were on the list from inside Carolina yesterday before the portal opened that Carolina was potentially looking at. So that is something that certainly could change as we go along here. But I definitely think that this is one of those spots where Carolina has maybe one or two guys that they're looking at, and they're just crossing their fingers and hoping that they get someone that can come in here, compete with Gio Lopez, and potentially beat him out for this upcoming season. Some of the other guys that were on campus today, as we were talking about, couple of really productive guys that I think Carolina fans would be pretty excited if they ended up landing. Running back Evan Dickens out of Liberty. He was a former 3-star prospect in the 2023 class, came from IMG Academy, of course, an area that Carolina is trying to recruit heavily. Went to Georgia Tech before transferring to Liberty last offseason. This season with Liberty, he ran for 1,339 yards and 16 touchdowns on his way to earning second-team All-Conference USA honors. That really says a lot about that conference if you got a guy running for almost 1,400 yards and 16 touchdowns, and he's not a first-teamer. But he put up some tremendous numbers there. I think he's one of the more underrated running backs in this transfer portal cycle. And then linebacker Umar Diamande, out of Connecticut. This would be the second straight year that Carolina has gone to Connecticut to find somebody to bring in through the transfer portal. This is your typical off-ball linebacker. He played just 12 defensive snaps for them last year, and then this season became a full-time starter, totaled 116 total tackles, 8 tackles for loss, 5 sacks, and 21 quarterback pressures in 846 snaps across 12 games. So a very productive guy. I think a nice starting spot if Carolina is going to try to bring someone in at that linebacker position. And then defensive lineman Trevorius Brown. He is a 6'7", 300-pound guy that comes from the JUCO ranks, after or originally comes from the JUCO ranks, then transferred to Florida. He had 2 years with the program there, played in just 6 games and compiled just 53 snaps. So this is one of those guys that would be looked at as a depth piece for Carolina at that position, especially if Carolina can get all 4 of those guys. We already know that 2 are back into the fold, or at least we've heard that 2 are back into the fold. 1 is potentially coming back, and then they're just waiting on CJ Mims to make it official as well. I find it hard to believe that Carolina would be looking for someone at that position that they're going to bring in to try to start. This would be someone that they're bringing in because of his frame. So you hear those 3 guys. What do you think about that group that Carolina had on campus today?
Yeah, I think it's a really good start to trying to just add some talent, some depth to your roster in areas that you feel like you need it. You look at the running back, you get 14 yards or 1,400 yards of production. I think it'd be a nice compliment to Damon June. And look, as much as you and I like him, and we see the upside and what he can be, I do think he's a guy that needs someone in that backfield to share the carries with. And so I understand, even though Damon June is back, why Carolina is seeking help at that position in the portal. The second I saw the kid from UConn, I simply just said, hey, he looked really good in Carolina blue. So whatever you got to do, to ensure that you can maybe get him, do it, because I like that production. I think it'd be an upgrade of what you had, at that position a year ago, and in a lot of ways as well. And hopefully he doesn't endure the injuries that Price Yates had to endure, because I think Price Yates would have been a real productive player had he not been as injured as he was, this past season. So, look, none of these names are maybe, sexy. They're maybe not going to, grab your eye or be attention grabbing with the headlines from an Inside Carolina Tar Heel 24/7. But I do think, these are quality football players that you could see making an impact for Carolina right away. And I think that's the biggest difference in this portal cycle compared to last year. And part of it is because of how many freshmen Carolina brought in. But, Carolina last year, they were just taking flyers on bodies because they just had to field a roster. So there were a lot of guys that they knew once they even signed them, they weren't going to be really impactful in terms of on the field, but they needed guys to practice, in the week leading up to the game, do some Sunday Night Football stuff, see if they can maybe find a few diamonds in the rough. I think this year you've got your foundation. You've got the guys coming back from last year that you're going to count on. You've sold you've sold the fan base on this freshman class being the foundation of this football program for the next 3 to 5 years. So now what the portal is about is just supplementing that roster in a way that you could not do a year ago. And I think that'll go a long way to maybe seeing how we feel about Michael Lombardi as a GM, Bill Belichick as a guy as they're adjusting to the college game. Because I think last year it's just too hard to grade because of how many guys they had to bring in on whether they had a real eye for talent and guys that fit their system. Hopefully we get an offensive coordinator hire that's official by the end of the weekend. And you can start to find guys that fit the system. But, I do think they're in a much better spot this year to supplement the roster in a way they weren't able to do a year ago.
Yeah, Connor Griffin says that it is official, but the school will not release it because of his baggage. This is basically what I have heard too. For the most part, it seems like the hire has been made, but for some reason they're not going to officially announce it until who knows when. I don't know if they will officially announce it. I mean, there were guys last year that were on the staff that never officially got announced, not officially by but by the program itself. And so who knows if they will end up officially announcing Bobby Petrino as the guy. But we know that he has been a part of the meetings for Carolina's offensive portal targets. He was in the room. We saw that from Tar Heel 24/7 in their reporting last night that he was going to be in the room today when Billy Edwards Jr. made his visit there. So that tells you that he is a part of this staff, and they just need to make the announcement official. But who knows how they're going to go about that. It's just another part of the confusion when it comes to the Bill Belichick era of how they do things. Everything is weird. Nothing is as it should be with normal processes of how things get done. So, in terms of that, I think that's pretty much put away. It's just about when the news will be announced officially. Going back to the group of guys that they had on campus today, love Diamande. I think that's certainly a guy that Carolina should be looking to get in here. I mean, the numbers right there are exactly what you're looking for from one of your off-ball linebackers. I think he's going to be a guy that, probably is going to be able to fill that role that you saw left behind by a very good linebacker in Andrew Simpson, who I thought had a pretty good year for Carolina, all things considered. I think Diamande could certainly be a guy that fills his shoes perfectly. You need a few short-term contributors there for Carolina, some high-end short-term contributors at that linebacker spot. I think he could certainly be that. And then Dickens, I think he is exactly what Carolina is looking for. You're looking for a change of pace back. He's a guy that averaged 5.8 yards per carry this past year at Liberty. Again, finding the end zone 16 times, rushing for almost 1,400 yards. That is a tremendous output for a guy that's at the group of five level if you're worried about him coming up. He's a guy that's been in the ACC, just felt like he never really got a chance at Georgia Tech. I think he would be the perfect change of pace, and that's what you need in this backfield. You've got two guys that are going to run through tackles in Damon June and Benjamin Hall. They're downhill running backs. That's ultimately what they're going to be. You need someone with a little bit of speed. We talked about one of the things that Carolina has to do through the portal, and they had to do it through the high school class as well, and I think they did. Now it's about doing it through that portal class, is finding guys with some speed, with some game speed, because this year's group just lacked that. On the offensive side of the ball. So hopefully Carolina can do that. I think Dickens would be the perfect guy for them to do that. All right, a couple other notes before we get out of here for this edition of the podcast. Carolina expected to host offensive tackle transfer Andrew Threet from Charleston Southern. That'll be tomorrow. That is the expectation. He announced that earlier today. He is a guy that made 32 consecutive starts for Charleston Southern. He has over 1,500 career snaps. He is a guy that finished with first-team all-conference honors and was a 3-year starter at right tackle and left guard, but he's a guy that's versatile enough to be able to play just about anywhere on the offensive line. So that is certainly somebody that Carolina should be interested in. They will be hosting him tomorrow, so that could be a big addition for them along the offensive line. Again, none of these guys are going to be the top guys in the portal. I know you're expecting Carolina to jump onto one of these lists for some of these top portal names. I just don't think that's necessarily where Carolina's looking. I think they're looking for, those second, third tier type of guys that might be, diamonds in the rough that are coming up from lower levels. I think that's where Carolina is going to do a lot of their work. Derek McDonald, linebacker from Syracuse, another guy that is expected to visit here sometime soon, according to Matt Zenitz of 24/7 Sports. Derek McDonald does already have some sort of visit planned to Carolina, just Don't know when that is. There hasn't been anything that's been officially released on that front. So we'll wait to see on that. That's a guy that has 173 career tackles at the ACC level. So certainly someone that is very interesting for Carolina. Has proven power for conference ability. So hopefully that's somebody that Carolina could get in the fold here, as well at that linebacker position. I think that would be a really nice addition there. They need to make 2, possibly 3 at that position. So the more names that pop up, the merrier for Carolina at that position. Same thing with the offensive line. There are 2 guys that Carolina officially offered today. One of them is Paul Bowling, the transfer out of Troy. Carolina trying to go back to that well for another year. They went there last year with the acquisition of Daniel King. That worked out incredibly well for them. Now they're looking to potentially do it again with a guy that played center last year for the Troy Trojans. That's certainly something that I think Carolina needs, just because they don't know for sure whether or not Christo Kelly is going to be back. This is also a guy that played some significant snaps for the team at left guard. Actually moved there as the season went along, played the first 10 games of the season at center, and then eventually moved for the final 3 games of the season to left guard. So that's certainly something that Carolina could be looking to do as well if they can get Christo Kelly back in the fold, is bring him in and play him at that left guard position. Also Carolina, did offer a transfer from Richmond at the wide receiver position, Isaiah Dawson. This is a smaller guy. I will warn people, Carolina fans, that are worried about smaller, shorter players. This is certainly a shorter guy at 5'8", 191, but he is a guy that hails from Garner. He is an in-state guy that went to Richmond. And this past year, he had 42 catches for 575 yards and 4 touchdowns. This would be a guy that Carolina, of course, will be looking to play in the slot. And they're looking for guys that simply can just make a difference in that wide receiving core alongside of Jordan Shipp. So this would be maybe, a nice first step. It wouldn't be the end-all, be-all. I think there are other guys. There was a rumor that Carolina is looking into University of Louisiana Monroe transfer, Jonathan Bibbs. That has not been confirmed. But one thing to note about Bibbs, second in all of the country in terms of yards yards after the catch average. So that's what Carolina, I think, is looking for. Guys that can make plays before the ball is thrown, but also guys that can make plays after the ball is thrown. So that's going to wrap it up for this edition of the podcast, guys. Make sure you head over to the website, HeelToughBlog.com. Check out all of the information that we have up there for you guys right now. As I mentioned, we got that article up there about Austin Alexander that you guys can go back and read a little bit more about how impactful that's going to be. Not a guy that played a lot for Carolina, but again, another young guy that leaves a room that is now down to just 4 scholarship players that are coming back from a year ago. They do have a couple of guys coming in from the high school ranks, but the thing is that unfortunately, not sure how early those guys are going to be able to contribute. So Carolina may have to go into the portal. Hopefully, as we talked about, they can get a guy like Tyler Thompson back into the fold. But if they can't, then Carolina is going to have to hit that portal hard at that edge rusher position. So read a little bit about Austin Alexander. Also check out, the other articles that we have up there for you guys. We got that article about the transfer visitors that were on campus earlier today. Read a little bit more about those guys that we talked about in there, including more about Billy Edwards Jr. We've got a whole article that's up from when it was announced last night that he would be officially visiting. Shout out to the Tar Pit podcast guys. They got the scoop first on him being a guy that was going to visit on Friday. So shout out to those guys for working hard to get that. And we used their report to be able to write our report or our article about it. So make sure you go back and check that out We would greatly appreciate that. And all the other articles today, plenty of other stuff up there on the website, all the re-signing articles, and we'll have more on the other guys that I talked about there at the end, Threet, McDonald, Bowling, and Dawson. There will be something up on the website about all of those guys too that you guys will be able to check out. And of course, we're going to continue to make sure that we have our eyes and ears peeled for any new information that comes out in the transfer portal, whether it involves guys that Carolina is hosting, guys that Carolina is offering, or if it involves more re-signings for Carolina with the current roster. We'll have you covered on the website, HeelToughBlog.com. Wall-to-wall transfer portal coverage for right now. Of course, any other recruiting news that comes out, we'll have you on that front. Meanwhile, on the basketball side of things, conference play is in full swing. Carolina just picked up a victory on Tuesday over Florida State. Now they get ready to play SMU tomorrow afternoon. Josh will have the preview for you. I'll have the recap for you of that game. So should be a very exciting one, a tricky test for Carolina against a team that's scoring 91 points per game in the SMU Mustangs. Can Carolina get it done on the road against them in Dallas? We'll have you covered regardless of what happens over there on the website. Also, make sure that you check out the social media pages and the YouTube page, guys. Make sure you go over there to YouTube. Check us out on there. I know there were a bunch of you guys watching over there earlier this evening. Really appreciate all of those who stopped by the YouTube stream. That will be where you can watch not only this podcast's YouTube streams, but the Four Corners podcast as well. So we're going to be back recapping that game against SMU sometime this weekend. Make sure that you're there and locked in for that. And of course, if we have another edition of the podcast to do, that'll be the same place to catch this podcast as well. So go to that page, make sure you subscribe, because we didn't reach our goal of getting to 600 by the end of the new year, but let's get there here within the first month of this new year. That we would greatly appreciate it from you guys if we could get that there. And then over on the social medias, at Heel Tough Blog on Twitter, at Heel Tough Blog, just search it on Facebook and we will pop up. Last thing that I wanted to say before we go, wanted to thank all of you guys for the support. I know it's a new year, meant to send something out on social media yesterday, but there's just so much going on that trying to keep up with it is crazy. But did want to thank everybody that tuned into the podcast this past year. It was our most successful year by far, especially with the fact that we did go to full-time video. So really appreciate all of you guys who are along for the ride this year, and hoping that there are going to be some new fans that find us during this season and we can continue to grow this family, but especially the OGs, the ones that have been here since the beginning. We really appreciate you guys for being a part of the Heel Tough Blog family. So that wraps it up for this edition of the podcast. Once again, want to thank Josh for hosting with me. Want to thank you guys for watching and listening. And as always, go Tar Heels.